A different theory of relativity. Poverty. Now, this has nothing to do with physics, and it's only a cute title I thought up. So don't hold it against me that it has absolutely nothing to do with physics and is only a cute title. But I notice everyone in content creation, streamers and YouTubes and whatever else, they all say, I was poor. I grew up poor. But like all the markers I look for in someone who grew up in poverty, like behaviors, habits, expectations, familiarities, like none of those sync up. Like they don't know anything about drugs, they don't know anything about crime, they don't know anything about violence. Like these are all like movie things to them. Like they have nothing to do with their life. And if you grew up in poverty, you grew up around these things. Like these things were every day. Like it's part of life. You can't escape it. That's why it sucks so bad, because you're constantly surrounded by predatory people doing fucked up shit, and usually you've been preyed on. And that's why everyone has that hard attitude about them, because people always prey on the weak. You can't let yourself be weak, or what happened to me will happen to them. And you don't want those things to happen. So that's why everyone has an attitude about them. And a lot of the time, the attitudes I see in content creation, once again, don't sync up to this. And it does a disservice because, like, I'll see people ask content creators for advice. And if I followed their advice in my late teens and early 20s, it would get me killed. Like, the shit they say, it's only someone from a two-parent household could say that. Like, you couldn't have those ideas unless someone cared about you, like unless someone took care of you, unless someone wanted you to succeed. And people from poverty don't have that. Like, if you grew up in poverty, there's, I don't want to say no one, but I'm going to say no one in poverty comes from a two-parent household. I'm sure there are a couple that exist, and like the cards are just against these people, and like, but most of the time it's one parent households. All the parents have emotional problems from their upbringing, they come from fucked up lives. It's just unfair circumstances from the door. And it bothers me because of that. Like, I know the stuff they say, like, they're telling someone who is on step like 3 to do what's on like step 19. And granted, in their life, they were carried that far, and that's what they expect everyone else's life to have been. But they can't imagine a life where, like, Maslow's hierarchy of needs is like safety is still a problem. Like, only recently, even in myself, did I start to have some semblance of safety. And until you have that, like, everything else around you is chaos. And if you grew up in an unsafe environment and were constantly victimized, you can't just like leave that. You don't just like shut the light off when you're out of that room and it's all gone away. It owns your mind and controls you. Now, when you start talking about elements of safety and people that have taken that away, it really doesn't matter how affluent the family you grew up in is. If people took away your sense of safety, like, your life's just chaos. And until you get some semblance of it back, nothing will work. Now then you start getting into like the next needs and stuff, but I'm not that far along in it. But I think about this when I hear like I don't want to name people because it's kind of prickish to call people out on stuff, and I don't like that whole culture that's formed of exposing people and stuff. Like, frankly, it ain't my business. It's got nothing to do with me. But I do think it does a disservice and it's dangerous because if people actually try to follow that advice, you're gonna get somebody fucking killed. And I know they don't see it that way. Like they see it as like I pulled myself up by the bootstraps and all that bullshit. But really, you grew up in a family where people took care of you and people wanted you to succeed and people taught you stuff and like encouraged you and affirmed you as a person and shit, and not just you know uh if you complain you're gonna get smacked in the face. Like, so you just learn to never say anything about what's going on because you don't want to get hit by a parent too. you know uh it's that, like, problems, difficulties, unfair circumstances. These are all the things that come with poverty. And that's why everyone wants to say, I was poor, I grew up poor. But they didn't. And I don't know. It just bothers me. I dislike it. I feel it's a disservice and I feel it is dangerous to the people that don't know better. And when like I think back to myself and I assumed everyone's life was like mine. Now I come to find out that that is absolutely not true because I used to wonder how people deal with it. Like, how did all this shit happen to them? And like they're functional, they're like normal and can fit in and like hold social relationships and interact with people and not like a constant emotional mess and like constantly breaking down crying and shit. Like, I couldn't figure it out and it used to drive me fucking insane. And I mean, this went on well into my 20s. And I started in my mid 20s, I kind of started to figure it out that like I knew me and them were different, but I didn't know like our experiences were that different. And then as I got to be 28 and like it all started to come together and I was like, "Oh, I understand now. We're basically a different species." And that is honestly the way I look at it sometimes, is that we are just completely different species. And trying to get them to understand is useless. You'll never get, at least maybe in like a story or something that you get people to relate to, but certainly not in the accusatory sense of like you weren't poor and you're full of shit. But when my dad and my mom split, right, I was young, but I went to live with my dad and who is now my stepmom. I lived there, and they lived in an affluent suburb, and I went to school there. Did I explain this already? I feel like I explained this already. I'm gonna explain it again if I did, and then I'm gonna shut the fuck up. But I went to school there, and all the kids would say how ghetto the school was. And that really fucked with me because I couldn't figure it out because it was one of the nicest places I had ever been. And like, I could not figure that out. But poverty and poor is relative, like to your friend circle. There's like a poor person in your friend circle, and that person is poor. But, you know, there's the terms, a lot of these words are relative. They're relative to your circumstances, to your life. And, like, to me, poverty, poor, poor and poverty are the same thing. Like you are below the poverty line. Um, that's what poor means in my eyes. Like you don't have enough. You can't take care of all your basic needs. Like, like the Maslow's hierarchy of needs thing. Like poverty means you probably were never safe growing up. And that's one of the main things I look for, that tick, constantly looking around. It's like you'll notice me doing that here. And even though I'm in an apartment alone, I'm constantly looking around because I can't shut that off. I always expect some kind of attack. And like even outside, I've always assumed one day someone's just gonna walk up and shoot me in the head. Like, as if that's a normal thing. Like, that's just always what I assumed would happen. And apparently, that's not normal for most of the United States, but I had no idea. I thought that was like, died of natural causes. Somebody walked up and shot him in the head. Anyway, I'm gonna shut the fuck up now. Uh, this has gone on far too long, and it was just a stupid, cute little thing that I thought was funny. Anyway, take it for what it's worth.